Welcome, weary travelers of the dark, to Throne of Nightmares, where the shadows whisper secrets too terrible for daylight. Tonight, we gather around a story so chilling, so steeped in sorrow and strangeness that it has lingered in the forgotten corners of history, clawing at the edges of memory. This is not a tale for the faint of heart. It is a descent into a world where the dead refuse to rest, where the living are bound by curses they cannot see, and where a single moment, captured in time, becomes a prison for the soul. Tonight, we unravel the mystery of the Prescott brothers buried alive in a post-mortem portrait. Picture, if you will, a cold November evening in 1858. The air is thick with frost, and the streets of Blackthorn Hollow, a small New England town nestled in the shadow of jagged hills, are silent save for the creak of bare branches and the distant toll of a church bell. The townsfolk huddle in their homes, their hearths casting flickering shadows on the walls, as if the darkness itself is alive, watching. Blackthorn Hollow is a place where secrets are buried deep, sometimes too deep. And in this forgotten hamlet, two brothers, Elias and Nathaniel Prescott, met a fate so horrifying that it defies reason, a fate sealed within the frame of a photograph that should never have been taken. You've heard of post-mortem photography, haven't you? In the Victorian era, it was a custom born of grief, a way to preserve the likeness of the departed. Families would pose their loved ones, dressed in their finest, as if they were merely sleeping, capturing one final memory before the grave claimed them forever. But what happens when the dead are not truly gone? What happens when the camera captures something it was never meant to see? The Prescott brothers' portrait is no ordinary keepsake. It is a relic of terror, a window into a nightmare that refuses to fade. Our story begins with a family already touched by tragedy. The Prescotts were once prosperous, their name synonymous with wealth and influence in Blackthorn Hollow. Their grand estate, Thornfield Manor, stood atop a hill, its spires piercing the sky like the bones of some ancient beast. But by 1858, the family was crumbling, disease dead, and whispers of a curse had stripped them of their glory. Elias, the elder brother, was a man of ambition, his eyes burning with a hunger for legacy. Nathaniel, the younger, was quieter, a scholar haunted by visions he could not explain. Together, they were the last of their line, bound by blood and a shared dread of something they could not name. The photograph was meant to be a final act of defiance against their fading name. A portrait to immortalize the Prescott brothers, to prove they could not be erased. But something went wrong, terribly, unspeakably wrong. The camera, an invention still shrouded in mystery in those days, captured more than their likeness. It captured their fate. And in the days that followed, Blackthorn Hollow would never be the same. Tonight, we will walk the shadowed halls of Thornfield Manor. We will stand before the cursed portrait and peer into its depths. We will uncover the truth behind the Prescott brothers' final moments, moments that defied death itself. But be warned, listeners, some truths are better left buried. Some images once seen can never be unseen. Are you ready to face the nightmare? Thornfield Manor was a house that seemed to breathe unease. Its walls, clad in dark oak and draped with ivy, groaned under the weight of time. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of mildew and something sharper, something metallic, like old blood. It was here, in the autumn of 1858, that Elias and Nathaniel Prescott prepared for what they believed would be their salvation, a portrait to cement their legacy. Elias was 32, broad-shouldered, with a jaw set like iron and eyes that seemed to pierce through the world. He was a man who refused to bow to fate. The Prescott fortune had dwindled, their lands sold off to pay debts, their name tarnished by rumors of madness and misfortune. But Elias had a plan. He had heard of a traveling photographer, a man named Gideon Voss, whose work was said to capture not just faces but souls. Voss was a curiosity in Blackthorn Hollow, a gaunt figure with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Some whispered he was a charlatan, others that he was something far worse. Nathaniel, at 27, was Elias's opposite in every way. Frail, with pale skin and trembling hands, He spent his days in the manor's library, poring over forbidden texts. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried a weight that unsettled even Elias. Nathaniel had been plagued by dreams since childhood, dreams of a shadowed figure standing at the edge of his vision, its face obscured, its voice a low, guttural hum that spoke of things to come. "It's waiting for us," he would mutter, his eyes darting to corners where nothing stood. Elias dismissed it as weakness, but deep down, he felt the same chill. The decision to commission the portrait came after a particularly brutal season. Cholera had swept through Blackthorn Hollow, claiming lives and leaving the town steeped in grief. The Prescotts, though spared, were not untouched. Their mother had died years earlier in a similar outbreak, and their father had followed, some said, by his own hand. The brothers were alone now, save for their housekeeper, Mrs. Abigail Crane, a stern woman whose loyalty to the family was matched only by her silence. It was Abigail who arranged for Gideon Voss to visit the manor, though she did so with a reluctance that bordered on fear. Gideon arrived at dusk, his horse, drawn cart rattling up the overgrown path to Thornfield Manor. He carried a wooden box that housed his camera, a hulking, mechanical contraption that seemed to hum with a life of its own. The brothers greeted him in the parlor, where a fire cast long shadows across the room. Elias was all business, outlining his vision for the portrait, the brothers seated side by side, dressed in their father's finest suits, the Prescott crest looming behind them. Nathaniel, however, was silent, his eyes fixed on the camera as if it were a predator. The session was set for the following night, under the light of a full moon, which Voss insisted was necessary for the clarity of the image. Elias scoffed at the superstition but agreed. Nathaniel, though, grew paler with each passing hour. That night he confided in Abigail, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not a photograph," he said. "It's a trap." Abigail, ever practical, told him to rest, but her hands trembled as she poured his tea. The night of the portrait arrived, and Thornfield Manor seemed to hold its breath. The parlor was transformed into a makeshift studio, with heavy drapes blocking out the moonlight and candles casting a sickly glow. Voss set up his camera, his movements precise and eerily silent. The brothers took their places, Elias sitting tall, Nathaniel hunched, his hands clasped tightly to still their shaking. The air grew colder, though the fire roared. Abigail watched from the doorway, her face a mask of dread. Voss adjusted the lens, his fingers lingering on the machine as if caressing it. "Look into the lens," he instructed, his voice smooth as oil. Elias stared defiantly, but Nathaniel's gaze flickered, as if drawn to something behind the camera, something no one else could see. The flash ignited, a blinding burst of light that left spots dancing in their eyes. For a moment the room was silent. Then Nathaniel screamed. He collapsed, clutching his chest, his breath ragged. Elias rushed to his side, shouting for Abigail, but Voss remained still, his eyes gleaming with an unnatural intensity. "The image is perfect," he murmured as if nothing had happened. Abigail, trembling, helped Nathaniel to his feet, but his eyes were wild, unfocused. "It saw me," he gasped. "It saw us." The portrait was developed that night, in a makeshift darkroom Voss had set up in the manor's cellar. When it was unveiled the next morning, Elias fell silent. The photograph showed the brothers as they had posed, but something was wrong. Their faces were blurred, as if they had moved, though neither had. And in the background, where the Prescott crest should have been, there was a shape, a figure, indistinct but unmistakably human. Its eyes like voids staring out from the frame. Nathaniel refused to look at the portrait. He locked himself in his room, muttering about the figure in his dreams. Elias, enraged, demanded Voss explain the anomaly, but the photographer was gone. His cart vanished into the dawn. The brothers were left with the photograph, and the growing sense that something had been awakened within it. The days following the portrait's creation were marked by an oppressive stillness in Thornfield Manor. The air grew heavier, the shadows deeper, as if the house itself were mourning. Elias, ever the pragmatist, tried to dismiss the photograph's strangeness as a trick of the light, a flaw in Voss's equipment. But Nathaniel knew better. He could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes watching from every corner, the hum of something ancient stirring within the walls. Nathaniel's dreams grew worse. Each night, he saw the figure from the photograph, its form clearer now, a tall, gaunt shape cloaked in shadow, its face a featureless void save for those burning, empty eyes. It spoke to him, not in words but in sensations cold, suffocating dread, and a promise of something inevitable. He began to sleep with candles lit, as if light could keep the darkness at bay. But the candles flickered and died without reason, plunging him into blackness. Elias, meanwhile, was consumed by his own obsession. He studied the portrait for hours, searching for answers in its blurred faces and that haunting figure in the background. He noticed details that hadn't been there before. Faint scratches around the edges of the frame, as if something were trying to claw its way out. The more he looked, the more he felt a pull, like a current dragging him under. He began to hear things, whispers, footsteps, the faint click of a camera shutter in the dead of night. Abigail, the only tether to normalcy, grew increasingly withdrawn. She refused to enter the parlor where the portrait hung, claiming it made her skin crawl. One night, as she brought Elias his supper, she confessed a secret she had kept for years. The Prescott family, she said, was cursed. Generations ago, their ancestor, a ruthless merchant named Jeremiah Prescott, had made a pact with something unholy to secure his wealth. The details were lost to time, but the consequences lingered, a shadow that followed the family, claiming them one by one. Abigail's grandmother, a servant in the manor, had warned her never to speak of it. But the portrait, she said, had awakened it. Elias laughed off her story, but Nathaniel, overhearing, grew frantic. He demanded the portrait be destroyed. Elias refused, insisting it was their legacy, their last chance to be remembered. The brothers argued, their voices echoing through the manor's empty halls. Nathaniel, in a fit of desperation, seized a knife and lunged for the portrait, but Elias stopped him, pinning him to the floor.
"You'll ruin us," Elias shouted.
Nathaniel? Tears streaming down his face, whispered, "We're already ruined." That night, Nathaniel vanished. Elias searched the manor, calling his name, but found only an empty bed and a candle snuffed out. The portrait, untouched, seemed to glow in the moonlight, the figure in the background more distinct, its head tilted as if watching. Elias, gripped by a mix of fear and fury, resolved to find his brother. He scoured Blackthorn Hollow, questioning townsfolk who averted their eyes and whispered about the Prescott curse. No one had seen Nathaniel, no one, that is, except old Mrs. Harrow, a widow who lived at the edge of town. Mrs. Harrow, half blind and half mad, claimed she had seen Nathaniel stumbling through the woods, his face pale as death, muttering about the one in the picture. She pointed Elias toward the old cemetery, a place shunned by the townsfolk, where the Prescott's ancestors lay buried. Elias went alone, armed only with a lantern and his resolve. The cemetery was a labyrinth of crumbling headstones, overgrown with thorny vines. As he searched, the air grew colder, the shadows thicker. Then he saw it, a figure standing among the graves, motionless, its back to him. Nathaniel. Elias called, his voice trembling. The figure did not turn. It raised a hand pointing to a fresh grave, the earth still loose. Elias approached, his lantern shaking, and saw the name carved into the stone, Nathaniel Prescott. His heart stopped. He fell to his knees, clawing at the dirt, screaming his brother's name. But the grave was empty, and when he turned, the figure was gone. Elias returned to the manor, his mind unraveling. The portrait now seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Nathaniel's face was clearer, but his eyes were wrong, wide, staring, filled with terror. The figure in the background was closer, its hand resting on Nathaniel's shoulder. Elias, unable to bear it, covered the portrait with a cloth, but the whispers grew louder, the air colder. He began to dream of the figure too, its voice now clear, "You cannot escape." Days later, Elias disappeared. Abigail found the manor empty, the portrait uncovered. Its surface pristine, but for one detail both brothers' faces were now sharp, their expressions frozen in agony, and the figure in the background was gone. The townsfolk, too afraid to enter the manor, burned it to the ground, the portrait with it. But the story did not end there. The ashes of Thornfield Manor were said to glow at night, and those who ventured too close heard whispers, two voices calling for help, forever trapped. To understand the horror of the Prescott brothers' fate, we must step back into the world of 1858, a time when death was both a spectre and a companion. The Victorian era was obsessed with mortality, its culture steeped in rituals to honor the dead. Post-mortem photography, or memento mori, was one such ritual, born from a need to hold on to those who had passed. Families, especially in rural towns like Blackthorn Hollow, would spend their last pennies to capture a final image of their loved ones, often posing them with the living to create an illusion of life. But this practice was not without its shadows. Photography itself was still a new art, its mechanics shrouded in mystery. The daguerreotype, a process requiring long exposures and volatile chemicals, was seen by some as alchemy, a way to steal a piece of the soul. Superstitions abounded. Mirrors were covered in homes where death had visited, lest the spirit be trapped in the glass. Cameras, with their unblinking lenses, were sometimes feared as mirrors of a different kind. In Blackthorn Hollow, a town already steeped in Puritan folklore, such fears were amplified. Stories of witches, pacts, and vengeful spirits were as common as the wind that swept through its hills. The Prescott family, too, was part of this tapestry of superstition. Blackthorn Hollow's records, though sparse, mention Jeremiah Prescott, the ancestor Abigail spoke of. In the 1700s, he was a merchant who amassed wealth through trade. Some said too quickly. Whispers of a deal with a dark stranger followed him, fueled by the sudden deaths of his rivals. The Prescott curse, as it came to be known, was said to claim the family's heirs, leaving no generation untouched. By 1858, the curse was a local legend, spoken of in hushed tones by those who remembered the family's fall. The cultural context of the time also shaped the brothers' story. The cholera outbreaks of the mid-19th century ravaged New England, leaving towns like Blackthorn Hollow gripped by fear. Death was omnipresent, and the line between the living and the dead felt thin. Spiritualism, a movement that promised communication with the departed, was gaining traction, with seances and mediums drawing desperate crowds. Gideon Voss, the photographer, may have been influenced by this fervor. His reputation as a man who could capture more than the eye could see hints at a blend of science and mysticism, a dangerous combination in a town already on edge. Local folklore also plays a role. Blackthorn Hollow Cemetery, where Elias searched for his brother, was notorious. Known as the Hollow Grounds, it was said to be built on an ancient burial site, possibly Native American, though records are unclear. The townsfolk avoided it, claiming the ground was unquiet. Stories of figures seen among the graves, of voices calling from empty tombs, were common. The Prescott family's plot, at the cemetery's heart, was particularly feared, its headstones said to shift in the night. The technology of photography itself adds another layer of unease. The daguerreotype process required subjects to remain still for minutes, their eyes fixed on the lens. Any movement resulted in a blur, which some believed was a sign of the soul's unrest. The Prescott brothers' blurred faces in the portrait align with this, but the figure in the background defies explanation. Was it a trick of the light, a double exposure, or something else? In 1858, such anomalies were often attributed to the supernatural, especially in a town like Blackthorn Hollow, where science and superstition were uneasy bedfellows. The role of curses in Victorian culture cannot be ignored. The idea of a family curse, like the one Abigail described, was a common trope, rooted in the era's fascination with inherited sin. The Puritans who founded towns like Blackthorn Hollow believed in divine retribution, and stories of families punished for their ancestors' deeds were rampant. The Prescott curse, whether real or imagined, fit this mold. Its weight felt in every misfortune that befell the family. By blending these historical and cultural threads, we see how the Prescott brothers' story was shaped by the fears of their time. The portrait was not just an image, but a convergence of grief, superstition, and the unknown. A perfect storm for the nightmare that unfolded. The story of the Prescott brothers is more than a tale of terror. It is a mirror held up to our deepest fears. At its core, it grapples with the human desire to defy death, to leave a mark that outlasts the grave. The portrait was meant to be a triumph over time, a way to preserve the Prescott name. But instead, it became a trap, a symbol of the futility of such ambitions. Let us peel back the layers of this nightmare and explore its themes, its symbols, and the universal truths it reveals. The first theme is legacy. Elias's obsession with the portrait was driven by a need to be remembered, to prove the Prescott name still mattered. In the Victorian era, legacy was everything. Families measured their worth by the stories they left behind. But the portrait subverts this, turning legacy into a curse. The blurred faces, the haunting figure, these suggest that some legacies are better forgotten, that clinging to them can awaken forces beyond our control. This resonates with our modern fear of irrelevance, of fading into obscurity in a world that moves on without us. The second theme is the fear of being seen. Nathaniel's terror of the camera, his insistence that it saw him, speaks to a primal dread, the fear of exposure, of having our innermost selves laid bare. The camera, in this story, is not just a tool but a witness, capturing not just the brothers' likeness but their essence. The figure in the background, with its void-like eyes, embodies this fear, an entity that sees too much, that knows too much. This connects to our modern anxieties about surveillance, about being watched in ways we cannot escape. The portrait itself is a powerful symbol. In literature and folklore, images often serve as portals, windows to other worlds or prisons for the soul. The Prescott brothers' photograph is both. Its blurred faces suggest a liminal state, neither fully alive nor fully dead, while the figure in the background hints at something trapped within, or perhaps trying to escape. This aligns with the Victorian fascination with the liminal, the space between life and death, where spirits linger and the veil is thin. Psychologically, the story explores the fragility of the human mind under pressure. Nathaniel's descent into paranoia, his dreams of the shadowed figure, reflect the toll of living with fear. Elias's denial, his refusal to destroy the portrait, shows the danger of clinging to control in the face of the unknown. Together, they represent two sides of the human psyche, one overwhelmed by dread, the other blinded by pride. Their story asks this: how do we cope when faced with something we cannot understand? The curse, whether real or imagined, is another lens through which to view the story. It taps into the cultural trauma of inherited guilt, a concept rooted in Puritan theology. The Prescott's downfall, tied to their ancestors' supposed pact, reflects the fear that our sins, or those of our forebears, will haunt us. This is a universal fear, one that persists in our modern obsession with generational trauma, the idea that we carry the wounds of those who came before. The role of Gideon Voss adds a layer of ambiguity. Was he a charlatan, a conduit for the supernatural, or something else entirely? His camera, with its unnatural hum, suggests a technology that borders on the occult. This reflects the 19th century tension between science and superstition, a conflict that still echoes in our distrust of new technologies. Voss himself is a liminal figure, neither fully human nor fully other, a catalyst for the brothers' doom. Finally, the story confronts the fear of entrapment. The brothers' disappearance, their faces frozen in the portrait, suggests a fate worse than death, to be trapped forever aware, in a moment of terror. This taps into our primal fear of losing agency, of being imprisoned in a state we cannot escape. The burning of Thornfield Manor, meant to destroy the portrait, only spreads its curse, suggesting that some horrors cannot be undone. The Prescott brothers' story is a warning: some things are better left unmade, some images better left unseen. It asks us to confront our own desires for immortality, our fear of being watched, and our inability to escape the past. It is a nightmare that lingers because it is rooted in truths we cannot ignore. And so, we come to the end of our tale, though the shadows it casts refuse to fade. The Prescott brothers, Elias and Nathaniel, sought to defy time, to etch their names into eternity through a single photograph. But in doing so, they invited something else, a presence that saw them, claimed them, and perhaps still holds them in its grasp. The ashes of Thornfield Manor have long since scattered, the portrait reduced to dust. Yet the story lingers, whispered in the dark corners of Blackthorn Hollow, a warning to those who listen. What became of the brothers? No bodies were ever found, no graves marked their names beyond that empty tomb in the hollow grounds. Some say they fled, driven mad by what they saw. Others believe they were taken, swallowed by the thing in the photograph, trapped in a moment that never ends. The townsfolk, in their fear, burned the manor, but fires do not always cleanse. On moonlit nights, they say the ruins glow, and two voices call from the dark, pleading for release. The portrait itself raises questions that haunt us still. Was it merely a photograph, flawed by the imperfections of a new art? Or was it something more? A doorway, a prison, a mirror to something beyond our understanding? The figure in the background, with its void-like eyes, defies explanation. Was it the manifestation of the Prescott curse, the shadow of their ancestors' sin? Or was it something older, something that waited in the hills of Blackthorn Hollow long before the town was built? Gideon Voss, the photographer, remains a mystery. No record of him exists beyond Blackthorn Hollow, as if he appeared and vanished with the wind. Was he a man or something else? Drawn to the Prescott's despair like a moth to flame. His camera, that strange, humming machine, was never found. Some say it still exists, passed from hand to hand, capturing images that should not be seen. The Prescott brothers' story is a reminder that some desires come at a cost. To seek immortality is to tempt fate, to invite the unknown into our lives. The portrait was their legacy, but it was also their undoing. It asks us to consider, what are we willing to sacrifice for a moment of eternity? And what happens when that moment becomes a cage? As we leave Blackthorn Hollow, let us carry this tale with us, a shadow that clings to the edges of our thoughts. The next time you stand before a photograph, old or new, pause and look closely. Look beyond the faces, beyond the frame. What do you see in the shadows? What watches from the corners? And if you feel a chill, a whisper at the edge of your mind, ask yourself, is it just a picture or something more? This has been Throne of Nightmares. Until we meet again, keep your candles lit and beware the things that linger in the dark. Good night.